The Astral Sea is a realm of many possibilities, a place so vast that it could never be fully discovered and charted. There are stories of great adventurers that sail the Astral Sea, and many of those stories are fiction. But this one is not. The blazing light of Aneris and the bright flare burns brightly as Corporal Marcellinus, the tall Gif, sits up in the bed, glances at the nearby rifle, and grabs the vibrating tabloid off the nightstand. Incoming contract, it reads. Marcellinus slides the tabloid open and reads a simple message. Task: gather fuel. Contractor: Paralyus Quinoa, black market specialist. Pay: 2 diamond coins. Inquire about further details behind the dark door at the slow Kindori. The corporal's eyes go wide. A question crosses the mind of Marcellinus Thames regarding who would pay that much for fuel. That's 400 squares after all. But the thought is quickly dismissed as the corporal taps the large blue lettering, accept contract. The corporal quickly wakes up the rest of the crew. Ex-Admiral Erron Krosis, Nartarif, the geltoid serving as the crew's pilot and engineer, is excited about the large profit and what he could do to better the Lamicculus, the impressive self-constructed lamprey ship sitting in the garage. Wiggle, the plasmoid, throws on some boots and prepares for the day. We are legally required to tell you that Wiggle has been dishonorably discharged from the Plasmic Guard, but are not required to specify the reasoning. And lastly, the autonome, Barley, whirs to its awake state, and begins pouring the shot of whiskey for the corporal before the day begins. The 4 crew members of the Lamicculus hastily get ready for the day, and step out onto the busy streets of Plasma. The looming tower refineries of the spaceport are dwarfed by the blazing hot bright flare, the gaseous jet emissions from the refineries. And even that is nothing in comparison to the gargantuan star of Aneris nearby. Warm weather as always, as the crew steps onto the blue pad and are carried slowly across the gaps between sectors within the city. Within just about 10 minutes, they step up to the slow Kindori, a tavern mounted on the back of a tamed astral whale. Even at this hour, the tavern is busy, but they pay no mind as they step into the back room. A tall and slim plasmoid sits expectantly. Corporal Marcellinus steps up. We're the crew of the Lamicculus, at your service. A bit of pause goes by before Paralyus Quinoa, their contractor, responds, filling them in on the details for their assignment. Go to Thrykris. Infiltrate the Thryhorn Compulser, and collect vials of Gigastar Fuel. That's the general gist of the instructions that they were given. Paralyus Quinoa was quick to point out that the Thryhorn Compulser was heavily defended by both Thrykreen and Sukatan troops. The Compulser is what keeps the entire planetoid that Thrykris is built upon stable, and prevents it from falling into the Voidex Vortex, which is the gravity well that Thrykris remains in orbit of. The Compulser is powered by 4 vials of Gigastar Fuel, and has 12 vials in reserve at all times. The crew of the Lamicculus was hired to acquire as many vials as they could, up to a total of 8. The vials are extremely sensitive and may destabilize quickly when removed from their storage compartments. They will be paid 2 diamond coins per vial that they acquire. The corporal simply nods, and the crew exits, excited to take the job ahead of them. In preparation, they purchase the required standard fuel to make the 5 astronom distance to Thrykris, and the 7 astronom distance in return. They also purchase food and rations, and stock their bar. Erron Krosis prepares the Lamicculus for flight, and tinkers with the engine to make it run faster and smoother. And with that, our crew quickly takes off at rapid speed, heading towards the distant planetoid of Thrykris, and away from the radiant star of Aneris. The journey is rather smooth the first 4 travel periods, but the 5th and final period has some mishaps. Early during that period, Corporal Marcellinus notices astral debris moving in parallel with their vessel, and the engine dies shortly after. Upon further investigation, a gravitational pull so strong is wearing the engine out. They are being pulled into the Voidex vortex. With no time to delay, Erron Krosis works quickly on the engine as time is running out. Barley grabs a new fuel cell to load into the engine. The corporal keeps an eye out on the upper deck as various debris collide with the vessel, rocking it back and forth. And Wiggle mechanically steers the ship from the helm. The engine flares to life, and the fuel cell injected into it is just enough to launch them out of the Voidex vortex's pull. After those terrifying events, our crew finally lands on Thrykris, which is mostly covered with shallow, crystal blue water and dotted with small islands. They hope to avoid attention drawn to their landing by parking their vessel outside of the nearby settlement. They create a small raft to transport them and their fuel cell compartment storage unit towards the main and centralized portion of Thrykris. About half a mile across the shallow waters, the tower structure of the Thryhorn Compulser generates a powerful blue polarity reversing gravitational barrier facing the vortex above them, keeping the planetoid from falling into it. Our crew devises a plan, just specific enough that it might work. Barley forges a letter as a safety inspector to hopefully bypass security and gain access to the compulsor. Erron uses disguise self to appear as a native Sukatan. The crew does draw some eyes as they enter the populated portion of Thrykris, but they aren't stopped until they reach the bridge that connects the main island to the compulsor facility. But, with clever persuasion and deception, Barley tricks the Thrykreen guard into believing that he is in fact a safety inspector. And they cross the bridge. They must enter the metal gate to the facility. They are stopped yet again by several Sukatan and Thrykreen guards. Erron and Barley continue their story, and with another careful lie and a bit of guilt-tripping, they are permitted access to inspect and tour the facility on the condition that they hand over their official documentation, which Barley does, knowing that it's forged, and that they now have limited time. But trying to stay ahead of things, our crew makes their way into the compulsor base facility. All is well, until a Sukatan security officer named Gerald, short for Geraldo Storin Sorax, lets the group walk past and reads the letter that Barley forged. He looks up at them, back to the letter, and then at them again, acknowledging that they are not who they say they are, and triggers a security alert for breach. Cover blown. Our crew jumps into action. They lock the door behind them by shooting the operating mechanism and take off down the hallway towards the compulsor generator room. Erron sets traps along the way, should the guards behind them get through and enter the door. Barley and Wiggle splint ahead and make it to the room first. When they pass through the blast door, they are greeted by 6 heavily armed guards with laser rifles that lock the generator room shut and prepare for further breach. Wiggle and Barley waste no time trying to pry the door open, and a full-scale fight breaks out as laser rifles shoot towards our crew, and our 4 crew members retaliate. For over 1 full minute, the firing and fighting goes non-stop, before Erron managed to slip into the room and remove one of the vials in the compulsor's core. Out of instinct, one of the guards spins around and fires a laser rifle towards Erron, which, unbeknownst to him, would accidentally detonate the vial, and a massive explosion rocks the room and the facility alike, and it threatens to trigger a chain reaction of other vials exploding in the generator core. In a twist of sheer luck, only the vial that Erron was holding detonates, but it absolutely disintegrates the heavily wounded guards. While the fiery explosion does substantial damage to our own crew, it buys them just enough time to start gathering vials. One by one, They all run into the room and begin to grab vials and transfer them into the storage unit. In just 18 seconds, they acquire 6 vials, as more troops are coming up the hallway behind them and closing. They don't have time to grab another vial, so they take off towards the top deck of the Compulser. With perimeter guards swarming them, and the ones also on their tail, they come face to face with the edge of the upper deck, and are faced with no choice but to jump into the shallow waters far below. There's no time to consider these options. They each leap from the platform and cannonball into the shallow bay before quickly swimming away. Thrykris and Sukatan guards fire pistols and rifles down into the bay, but it has little effect on our crew as they narrowly escape. They make a speedy return to their ship and depart Thrykris, not even looking back in the process. And when they return to Plasma to collect their payment, the perils are made entirely worth it. A total of 12 diamond coins for the 6 vials they acquired, which is equal to 2,400 squares, enough for them to retire if they wanted. While they may be wanted criminals on Thrykris, these 4 individuals have made history by doing what none have been able to do before them, stealing heavily guarded Gigastar Fuel from Thrykris. And with their handsome payment, our crew decides to take some time to relax and unwind. And that concludes this tale from Aelithia, or should I say, tale from the Astral Sea, Starfuel Snatch, a short story.